Imagine camping in the wilderness when a mysterious figure with a shovel starts creeping toward your tent. What would you do? In this video, you'll discover the terrifying true story of a park ranger's night on Medorot drilling and how he kept his group safe from an eerie intruder. By the end, you'll know exactly what to look for when you're out in the wild before it's too late. Stay tuned, because what he finds out will haunt you long after the video ends. The rain was steady as we started up Mr. Drilling. I was leading a small group of middle school kids on what was supposed to be a memorable adventure. A chance to get them away from screens and city life and into the woods. The kids were excited, their chatter cutting through the sound of the rain pattering against our jackets. I didn't mind the weather. As a park ranger, I'd grown used to the unpredictability of the mountains. But something about this trip felt off from the start, like the mountain itself was trying to warn us. By the time we reached the top, the rain had tapered off, leaving behind a thick mist. The air was cold, and there was a heaviness to the atmosphere that I couldn't shake. We set up camp in the fading light, and I found a good spot away from the kids to string up my hammock. My co-leader was taking care of the group, making sure everyone was settled in their tents. The sky cleared just enough for the full moon to break through, casting long shadows across the trees. It was almost peaceful, almost. I wasn't ready to sleep, so I opened the book I'd brought along, hoping to lose myself in it for a bit. The sound of raindrops dripping off the trees provided a soothing backdrop, almost like a sleep aid. The kids had quieted down, their tents zipped tight, and I thought to myself how it might even turn into a relaxing horror night. But then I saw it. At first I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. You spend enough nights in the woods, and the shadows can start to feel like they're watching you. But this was different. Something moved along the trail we had hiked earlier, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. My heart skipped, and I perked up, thinking it might be a bear. I've dealt with bears before, and while they can be dangerous, I knew how to handle them. But as the figure got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a person. They had no light, no gear, and no reason to be out here. The closest road was miles away, and the path to the top was steep and isolated. My throat tightened as the figure kept moving closer, their silhouettes standing out against the pale light of the moon. I was frozen, barely breathing as I watched them approach our camp. The figure, a man from what I could make out, stopped at the edge of the clearing where we were camped. He stood still, almost like he was observing us, taking in every detail. I didn't move, didn't even blink. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there, watching. Then, without a sound, he walked to a tree a little farther away from the tents, sat down, and faced us. He didn't lie down to sleep. He didn't move. He just stared. I lay there, every nerve in my body on high alert. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Was he lost? Or was he something worse? I couldn't risk waking the kids and scaring them, but I also couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up my spine, the sense that something was very wrong. I decided to wait, just like I had so many other nights in the woods when danger felt close. The night dragged on painfully slow, each minute stretching out as I lay in my hammock, watching the man under the tree. He hadn't moved a muscle. His silhouette remained, perfectly still in the dim light, just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details of his face or clothes. I strained my ears for any sound, footsteps, breathing, anything, but all I could hear was the rain dripping from the trees. The forest was unusually quiet. Even the crickets and frogs had gone silent, as if the presence of this stranger had snuffed out all the usual nighttime sounds. I considered waking my co-leader but hesitated. What would I even say? Hey, there's a guy sitting out there just staring at us. It sounded absurd, like something out of one of those scary tales kids tell around campfires. But this wasn't a story. This was real. My mind kept drifting to the horror stories I'd heard from other park rangers, strange encounters deep in the woods, people who vanished without a trace. I never thought I'd be part of one. I tried to convince myself that he was just a lost hiker, maybe waiting for daylight to ask for help. But the way he was sitting, so unnaturally still, with his eyes, at least I assumed they were his eyes, fixed on us, made that explanation hard to believe. There was something deliberate about the way he had approached, and then just stopped. He wasn't lost. He was waiting. By now, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, plunging the forest into near darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. I couldn't sleep, not with him sitting out there. I kept thinking about the kids in their tents, oblivious to what was happening just beyond their nylon walls. They trusted me to keep them safe, and yet here I was, lying in my hammock, doing nothing but stare at the figure that hadn't moved an inch in hours. Then, as if sensing my thoughts, the man shifted. It was subtle, just the slightest movement of his head, tilting ever so slightly in the direction of my hammock. My breath caught in my throat. Had he seen me watching him this whole time? I felt exposed, like the thin fabric of the hammock was no barrier at all. I could almost feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see his face. He didn't stand, didn't make any noise, just adjusted his position, and that tiny movement made my skin crawl. The psychological weight of his presence was suffocating, like a thick blanket of tension draped over the camp. Every instinct I had screamed for me to get up, to wake everyone, to run, but where would we go? It was miles to the nearest road, and in the darkness, the trail was treacherous. There was no way I could lead a group of panicked kids through the woods at night. So I stayed where I was, paralyzed by indecision, watching the man as he watched us. The hours stretched on as I fought the urge to drift off to sleep. My muscles were tense, and every sound around me seemed amplified, the soft rustle of leaves, the occasional drip of rain still clinging to branches above. The man hadn't moved much since that slight tilt of his head, and yet the tension in the air was suffocating. It was as though his stillness spoke louder than any movement could. I kept glancing at the tents, wondering if any of the kids would stir, oblivious to the silent intruder just a few yards away. My co-leader was snoring softly, completely unaware of the situation. I should have woken him, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of escalating whatever was happening here. Fear that if I acknowledged the presence of this stranger, I'd have to confront what he truly was. Supernatural, human, psychological, it didn't matter at this point. The boundary between what was real and what I feared was becoming blurry. Around 3:00 a.m., the wind picked up slightly, making the trees sway. That's when I noticed it. He was gone. The spot where he had sat, perfectly still for hours, was now empty. My heart raced as I scanned the campsite, trying to spot any sign of him. The trail we had hiked was just visible in the moonlight, and I watched it for any movement, but there was nothing. Had he slipped away while I wasn't paying attention? Or was he still lurking nearby, hidden in the shadows just out of sight? I strained my ears, listening for footsteps or the crunch of leaves underfoot, but the forest had returned to its eerie silence. My mind raced, trying to decide what to do next. Do I wake the group and risk a panic, or do I just wait and hope that whatever this was would pass by morning? I was about to wake my co-leader when a sound made my blood run cold. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable, the slow, deliberate creak of a tree branch bending under weight. My eyes darted to the trees just beyond our camp, and that's when I saw him again. This time he wasn't sitting. He was standing. His figure was barely visible in the darkness, but I could make out the shape of a man, his head tilted down, almost like he was studying something on the ground. He was closer now, maybe 20 feet from where the tents were. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I realized what he was doing. He was walking slowly, methodically toward the tents, toward the kids. Without thinking, I threw myself out of the hammock, my body trembling as I tried to make as little noise as possible. My heart pounded in my ears, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I moved toward the tents, desperate to put myself between the man and the group. The closer I got, the more I could make out his figure. He wasn't just walking. He was dragging something. A long, dark object trailed behind him, scraping against the earth with a dull, unsettling sound. It wasn't until I was mere feet away from the first tent that I realized what it was, a large, rusted shovel. I froze. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The man was dragging a shovel, an old, rusted thing, its metal scraping the earth with each slow step he took toward the tents. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears, deafening in the dead silence of the forest. This wasn't just some lost hiker. There was purpose in his movements, a dark intent I couldn't quite understand. I took a slow step forward, my foot barely making a sound as it sank into the soft ground. My body screamed at me to run, but my mind was fixated on protecting the group. Every kid still sleeping in their tents was completely unaware of the threat creeping toward them. I wasn't going to let anything happen to them, not on my watch. I stepped between the tents and the man, hoping my presence would be enough to stop him. He stopped. The silence between us was unbearable, filled only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of rain. He stood there motionless once again, the shovel still in his hand. I could barely see his face in the shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating. My voice was caught in my throat. I wanted to yell at him, demand that he leave, but nothing came out. It was as if my body had betrayed me, paralyzed by a primal fear that no amount of training or preparation could have prepared me for. Finally, he moved. Not toward me, but to the side, his gaze never leaving mine as he stepped back into the darkness. He was retreating, slowly disappearing into the trees like a phantom. My body sagged with relief, but I didn't move. Not yet. I waited until I was sure he was gone, listening for any hint of his presence. No footsteps, no dragging shovel, just the faint sound of rain, a subtle backdrop to what felt like a nightmare. I stood there for what felt like hours, my senses on high alert, every rustle in the wind sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. Eventually I turned back to the tents, checking each one, making sure the kids were still asleep, unharmed. They had no idea how close they had come to danger, how close I had come to losing control of the situation. I stayed up the rest of the night, watching, waiting for him to return. But he never did. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I roused the group. The kids woke up groggy, yawning and stretching, unaware of the horror that had unfolded while they slept. I didn't mention the man. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, and I wasn't even sure they would believe me. As we packed up camp and began the long hike back down the mountain, I kept my eyes on the trail behind us, half expecting to see that shadowy figure following us once more. But the man never appeared again. He had vanished into the forest, leaving nothing behind but the memory of his unsettling presence. To this day, I don't know who or what he was, but the image of that shovel dragging behind him haunts me still. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, a reminder that even in the most familiar places, there are things that can't be explained. The kids would go on to tell their parents about their fun camping trip, the rain sounds, and how peaceful it was sleeping in the wilderness. They had no idea their bedtime stories could have been interrupted by something out of a horror story. A true story, one that I never fully understood. Even now, when I hear stories from other park rangers about strange encounters in the wild, I can't help but wonder if any of them have seen the same figure I did that night. Maybe it wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe Hez still out there waiting for another group to wander into his territory, another opportunity to sit and watch, shovel in hand. Some nights, when I lie awake and the rain begins to tap on the roof, I think about that night. The quiet of the forest, the suffocating tension, and the man who simply sat and stared. It's a memory that creeps in like the rain sounds before sleep takes hold. A memory that lives in the shadows, never fully fading away, and I hope I never see him again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's watching someone else, at this very moment, just like he did to me. What if the beautiful wilderness you love is hiding terrifying secrets? In this video, we'll dive into true park ranger horror stories that reveal the dark side of nature. You won't believe what they encountered: missing teens, eerie symbols, and a lurking presence that could change everything. Stay tuned to discover chilling tales that will make you think twice before stepping into the woods again. You know, the thing they don't tell you about being a park ranger is how quickly things can go from routine to terrifying. I've been doing this job for years and I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for the night we went looking for those kids. It was supposed to be a simple search, just a bunch of teenagers who hadn't returned from their camping trip on time. Happens all the time. Kids get lost, lose track of time, nothing new. But this time was different. We'd been hiking for hours, me and my coworker. I could feel the weight of the radio strapped to my chest, occasionally crackling with updates from base. But after about 20 kilometers in, things started to feel off. At first, it was subtle. The air got heavier. The trees seemed taller, darker. And then we started seeing the signs, literal signs that we weren't alone out there. Sticks carved into spears, freshly dug into the ground, weird symbols etched into the trees, like something out of a horror movie. But the creepiest part was a child stuffed bear hanging from a noose in one of the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. There was no wind. "This isn't right," I muttered under my breath, trying to make sense of it all. My coworker just nodded, his eyes scanning the woods. We didn't talk much after that, both of us too on edge to really say anything. It was clear that whoever had been out here wasn't just some random group of hikers. Everything looked freshly done, as if they knew we were coming and left these things for us to find. It made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on the task at hand, finding those kids, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being lured into something. As night fell, we decided to set up camp. We hadn't found any trace of the teenagers, and there was no way we were hiking out in the dark, not after what we'd seen. The rain started lightly tapping against the leaves above us, creating an almost calming sound, like one of those sleep aid apps, but it did little to ease the tension. We both sat by the fire, staring into the flames, pretending we weren't completely freaked out. Just a few more hours, I kept telling myself. We'll get up with the sunrise and cover more ground. Sleep came, but it wasn't peaceful. My mind kept racing, replaying the day's events over and over again. I woke up before dawn, the rain sound still present but softer now. As we packed up, I noticed something strange. A piece of fabric caught on a low branch, torn like someone had brushed past it in a hurry. And then, shoe prints, fresh ones. We must be close. But that hope was crushed a moment later when the radio crackled to life. "Base to all units, teens found. Repeat, teens found. 20 kilometers east. Return to base." I froze. If the teens were found so far away, then who or what had left the signs we saw? My heart pounded as all those eerie things came rushing back into my mind. We wasted no time packing up and getting out of those woods. I've heard plenty of scary stories, but nothing beats living through one. That night, the forest felt like it had a mind of its own, like it was watching, waiting. And as much as I'd like to forget it, those images, the spears, the carvings, the noose are burned into my memory. The hike back to base was nerve-wracking, to say the least. I couldn't get the thought out of my head if the kids were found 20 kilometers away. What the hell had we stumbled upon the day before? As the sun rose higher, the forest didn't seem to lighten up with it. It remained eerily dark, like the shadows were stretching to keep up with us. The rain sounds that had lulled me to sleep the night before now felt ominous, like a warning. We kept a steady pace, neither of us saying much. The quiet between us was heavy, loaded with unspoken fears, and the lingering images of those strange, freshly carved spears and symbols. The shoe prints and torn fabric from earlier still played tricks on my mind. Maybe we missed something, I thought. Maybe there's someone else out here, someone playing some sick game. But every time I tried to rationalize it, something inside me screamed that this wasn't something you could explain away. About halfway back, we came across another weird sight, more carvings. This time they were deeper, angrier, like whoever or whatever had made them was growing impatient. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. They were symbols, but nothing I recognized. I'd seen weird markings before on trails, things left behind by people trying to be edgy or leave their mark. But these felt deliberate. My coworker glanced at me, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. "Let's keep moving," he said, his voice tight. I didn't need convincing. The sooner we were out of these woods, the better. But as we pressed on, it felt like the trail was closing in on us. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches arching like twisted fingers, every sound a rustle of leaves. A crack of a branch had my heart racing. At one point we stopped to catch our breath, and that's when we heard it. Footsteps. At least, that's what it sounded like. Faint, but distinct. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my eyes darting through the trees. He didn't answer, just nodded, his hand reaching instinctively for the knife strapped to his belt. We stayed perfectly still, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then, Just like that, they started again, moving away this time. My mind was racing. Was someone following us? But why? Were they messing with us? Or was this something else entirely? The thought of turning back and confronting whatever or whoever it was crossed my mind. But every fiber of my being screamed at me to keep moving. We didn't speak much after that. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed us whole. The air felt heavier, denser, and every step we took seemed slower, like we were wading through something unseen. This wasn't just some hike anymore. This was something darker, something we couldn't explain. I'd heard true stories of people losing their minds out here, of strange occurrences that never made sense. But until now, I never believed them. Now, I was living one of those scary stories, and all I wanted was to get the hell out. As we continued our trek, every rustle of the underbrush felt amplified, echoing the racing pulse in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. Still, I was hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. A chill ran down my spine when I thought of the carvings and that bear hanging from the tree. It felt like a warning, a message we were too late to decipher. We finally reached a clearing that looked vaguely familiar, a small reprieve from the oppressive weight of the trees. I took a moment to catch my breath, letting the sunlight hit my face. "Just a little further," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but my voice cracked slightly, betraying my anxiety. My coworker simply nodded, scanning the horizon, his expression tight. As we moved on, I couldn't help but think about the teens. Had they seen any of this? What were they doing 20 kilometers away? The questions nagged at me, each one more unsettling than the last. "What do you think happened?" I finally asked, breaking the tense silence. He shrugged, his gaze still locked ahead. "Maybe they got lost," he replied. "But why go so far?" Suddenly, the radio crackled to life again. My heart raced as I grabbed it. "Base to Unit 2. All units. Please return immediately." It was a tense order. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. "What's going on?" I muttered, more to myself than to him. He glanced at me, his face pale, and I knew he felt it too, a sense of urgency that something wasn't right. The moment we turned back onto the familiar path, I felt a shift in the air. The sounds of the forest had changed. They felt heavier, laden with an unshakable tension. I glanced behind us, half expecting to see someone or something lurking just out of sight. Instead, it was just trees, shadows, and the eerie stillness that enveloped us. "We need to hurry," I said, my voice firm, trying to push through the anxiety clawing at me. But then, just as we reached a particularly dense part of the trail, we stopped in our tracks. Before us was a makeshift altar of sorts, crude yet strangely organized. Items laid out in a disturbing arrangement, a few more stuffed animals, some clothes, and my breath hitched what looked like a hand-drawn map. It pointed toward where we had just come from, towards the area with all the carvings. It made my stomach churn. Whoever had left this wasn't just messing around. They were sending a message. "Let's go," my coworker urged, his voice low and urgent. We turned to leave, but that's when I heard it again, footsteps, close this time. My heart raced, and my instincts kicked in. We took off running, adrenaline propelling us forward as branches clawed at our clothes. Whatever was behind us was gaining on us, and I had no intention of finding out what it was. The forest felt alive, the trees closing in around us as we sprinted back to safety. I could hear my coworker's heavy breathing beside me, but all I could focus on was the sound of those footsteps growing louder. The forest echoed with our panic. Every time I glanced back, the shadows seemed to swirl, teasing the corners of my vision. But when I turned fully, there was nothing, only darkness. We sprinted through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. Every snap of a twig felt like it was echoing in the silence that followed us, amplifying the tension that clawed at my throat. I could hear my coworker gasping behind me, and I was terrified that he might falter. I glanced back, and the fleeting glimpse of movement sent a fresh surge of panic through me. Whatever it was still following us. "Keep going," I shouted, my voice cracking as I urged us forward. The trail twisted and turned, but every path felt like a trap, each turn leading us deeper into the woods instead of toward safety. The sunlight that had peeked through the canopy earlier was now muted, filtering through the branches like the remnants of a fading dream. As we ran, the strange carvings flashed through my mind, each one a reminder of the dread way I'd felt the day before. The images of the child's stuffed animal swinging from a noose, and the angry symbols etched into the trees, blurred with the growing fear. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me, an inescapable weight. "What if they're out there?" I asked, though I wasn't sure who I was referring to, the missing teens or whatever was pursuing us. Suddenly, we broke through the trees into a small clearing. It felt surreal, like a momentary reprieve from the chaos. I quickly scanned the area, hoping to catch my breath and assess our surroundings, but the moment of calm shattered as I spotted a figure, half hidden behind a tree, its features obscured by the shadows. My blood ran cold, and I instinctively grabbed my coworker's arm. "Did you see that?" I whispered, terrified to make a sound. He nodded, his face pale and eyes wide, mirroring my fear. The figure shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something sharp gleaming in its hand. "We need to go! Now!" I hissed, dragging him back the way we'd come. We bolted back into the trees, pushing through the thick underbrush, the sound of our hurried footsteps mingling with the rain sounds in the distance. I could hear the figure moving behind us, crashing through the branches as it pursued us with relentless determination. I could almost feel its breath on my neck, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fear. Just when I thought we might lose it, we spotted a trail marker, a beacon of hope. "This way!" I yelled, steering us toward the faint sign that promised safety. Every muscle in my body burned, but I pushed through the exhaustion, willing my legs to carry us faster. The marker grew closer, and I could almost see the edge of the forest where the camp awaited. As we stumbled out of the trees, gasping for air, the sun hit us like a warm embrace. I turned to look back, my heart racing. The figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving nothing but a haunting silence in its wake. "Did we lose it?" my coworker gasped, his face drawn and pale. I didn't answer, my mind racing with the images of what we'd seen: the carvings, the altar, and the figure. "Let's just get to the camp," I finally managed, feeling a sense of urgency washing over me. I didn't want to linger in this place any longer. As we made our way toward the campsite, I could still feel the tension coiling in the pit of my stomach, the fear of what lay behind us. We made it back, but the experience had changed something within me. The woods that once felt like home had turned into something unrecognizable, filled with whispers and shadows. I knew I wouldn't forget those terrifying moments, nor the horror stories that would echo long after we left. And even as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the camp bathed in an orange glow, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting. Are you brave enough to confront the chilling realities behind park ranger experiences in Yellowstone? In this video, we promise to take you through an eerie encounter with a perfectly severed deer head that could shake your perception of nature. Miss this, and you may remain unaware of the lurking dangers in beautiful places like these. Don't go anywhere, stay tuned to find out what this chilling discovery reveals about our relationship with the wild. It was just another day at Yellowstone, the kind where the sun casts a warm glow on the vast landscapes, and the sound of rustling leaves fills the air. I was on patrol in Lamar Valley, about 11 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by the wild beauty of the park. The bison grazed lazily in the distance, their silhouettes stark against the expansive sky. It felt serene, almost too serene, like something was lurking just beneath the surface. As I walked along the well-trodden trail, the familiar sounds of nature, birds chirping, wind whispering through the grass, were interrupted by something I couldn't quite place. I approached a curve in the path, and there it was, right in the middle of the trail. A perfectly severed deer head lay. The first thing that struck me was the oddity of its presence. It was clean, no signs of a struggle, no blood, just a head, Ada's head, complete with eyes and tongue intact. I crouched down, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. I've seen wolf kills and bear spoils during my time in the park, but this was different. I had spent years tracking cougars back in South Dakota, so I was familiar with the aftermath of a hunt. But this was bizarre. No signs of scavenging, no ravens, no other animals showing any interest. Just the head, sitting there like a macabre trophy. The whole scene felt surreal, a haunting contrast against the backdrop of waving grass and grazing bison. Questions flooded my mind. How could this be? Even if a human were responsible, it made no sense. A doe has no antlers. Why leave it in plain sight? And why so perfectly severed? The absurdity of the situation was unsettling. I took a step back, scanning the area for any signs of life or movement, but it felt as though the world had frozen in that moment. It was broad daylight, yet I felt a chill creep up my spine. My instincts were on high alert, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I quickly took photos, documenting the scene for later, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to explain this to anyone. What kind of horror story was unfolding in front of me? This was more than just an unsettling sight. It was a narrative that stirred something primal within me, a feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. As I turned to head back, I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled into a chilling tale that would haunt me long after the day was over. After that day in Lamar Valley, I tried to push the incident to the back of my mind. I returned to the station, but I couldn't shake off the eerie sensation that clung to me. The deer head kept popping into my thoughts at the most unexpected moments while I ate my lunch. During briefings, even when I tried to relax at home, I felt like I was living a horror story, one that kept unraveling with every passing hour. The more I thought about it, the more I became aware of the oddity of it all. Back in the park, I overheard other rangers chatting about strange occurrences. One mentioned a night patrol where they found a whole herd of deer acting strangely, not bolting or grazing but standing still, staring into the trees as if they were witnessing something terrifying. The stories were starting to stack up, and I couldn't help but feel an unsettling connection to my own experience. The next morning I made a decision. I would head back to the site of the discovery. I wanted to gather more evidence, but I also hoped that revisiting the scene would bring some clarity. The rain had started to fall lightly as I made my way back to the valley. The soft patter of raindrops mixed with the distant sounds of wildlife created a calming backdrop that contrasted sharply with the unease brewing inside me. When I arrived at the spot, I found the severed head gone. The ground where it had rested was undisturbed, almost as if it had never been there at all. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. Had I imagined it? No, I remembered every detail, the starkness of the clean cut, the unsettling stillness surrounding it. My mind raced with possibilities, yet none made sense. I crouched down, scanning the area, trying to find any signs that might explain the mystery. Then, as if answering my silent questions, I spotted something glinting in the grass. I moved closer and found a small metallic object, slightly rusty but definitely man-made. I picked it up, realizing it was a keychain, an old one with a park ranger logo on it. My heart raced. Who would be out here with a keychain? It didn't belong to anyone I knew. This was getting stranger by the minute, like something pulled from a true story of horror that you might find in a scary compilation of park ranger tales. As the rain began to fall heavier, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn deeper into something that transcended the normal bounds of my job. The rain continued to pour, drenching everything in a thin veil of moisture that blurred my vision. Clutching the keychain tightly, I felt a rising tide of anxiety wash over me. I glanced around, half expecting something or someone to leap out from behind the trees. The metallic glint of the keychain felt like a curse now, a link to an event that should have remained buried in the depths of the valley. I started back toward my vehicle, each step heavy with the weight of what I had discovered. As I drove away, the rain beat against my windshield, creating a rhythmic pattern that was almost hypnotic. I turned on the radio, hoping to drown out my thoughts, but all I could think about was the severed deer head and the mysterious keychain. I imagined the worst, a twisted mind hidden among the park's beauty. Someone who thrived on fear and chaos. The idea of a human hand behind such a gruesome act made my skin crawl. Back at the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The chatter of my colleagues seemed distant, like echoes in a nightmare. I tried to share what I'd seen, but the moment I began to speak, the room fell silent. They listened, eyes wide with disbelief. A couple of rangers chuckled nervously, dismissing it as just another horror story made up to scare rookies, but I saw the unease flickering behind their smiles. They knew something was off, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. That night, as I prepared to leave, a sense of dread enveloped me. The rain had picked up again, turning into a steady downpour that blurred the boundaries between the ground and the sky. I climbed into my truck, the familiar sounds of nature replaced by an unsettling quiet. It felt like a scene from a scary tale, where the hero was about to face an unseen enemy. As I drove back to my cabin, the wipers swished furiously, yet the darkness outside felt alive, teeming with shadows that danced just beyond my line of sight. I parked, heart racing, and grabbed my flashlight. The beam sliced through the thick darkness as I approached my cabin, the shadows shifting ominously in its glow. That's when I heard a soft whispering sound, like a voice carried by the wind. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the rain. It was something else, something chilling. It felt like a warning. I stood there, gripped by an icy fear, realizing that the events in Lamar Valley were far from over. There was something out there, and it was slowly drawing closer. The rain hammered relentlessly against the cabin, creating an almost rhythmic backdrop to the growing tension inside me. I peered through the window, my flashlight beam flickering against the walls, illuminating the edges of the darkness outside. The whispering grew louder, a murmur just beyond my comprehension, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. I couldn't tell if it was just the wind or something more sinister lurking in the shadows. Determined to confront whatever was out there, I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the rain. The chill of the night air nipped at my skin, and with every step, I felt the weight of the keychain in my pocket, a grim reminder of the severed head and the mystery I couldn't shake. I moved toward the source of the sound, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, echoing the fear swirling in my mind. As I stepped further away from the safety of the cabin, the whispers coalesced into fragmented words, barely audible but undeniably present. "Leave now," the voice was chilling, sending a shiver down my spine. I stopped dead in my tracks, scanning the area around me, but there was nothing, just the relentless patter of rain and the rustle of leaves. I took a breath, reminding myself to stay rational, but my gut told me otherwise. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the tree line, and froze. There, just beyond the reach of the light, stood a figure. The rain streamed down its face, but I could see the outline, a silhouette that felt disturbingly familiar. My heart raced. Was it another ranger, or something far more unsettling? The keychain weighed heavily in my pocket, a tangible connection to whatever darkness had invaded my life. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tremor betrayed me. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I felt a rush of anger and fear. "What do you want?" The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Then, with a suddenness that shocked me, the figure stepped into the light. It was a man, disheveled, wild-eyed, drenched from the rain, but he had a strange aura that felt almost otherworldly. "I found it," he shouted, his voice hoarse, frantic. "The head. It's a warning." My breath hitched as his words echoed in my mind. The keychain slipped from my grasp, clattering against the ground as the realization hit me hard. This wasn't just a local horror story. It was something real, a terrifying truth woven into the fabric of the park's beauty. The rain continued to fall, the whispers faded, but the terror remained, reminding me that in the heart of nature, sometimes the scariest tales are true, and the line between man and beast is as thin as the fog that enveloped us that night. The mystery was far from solved, but I knew one thing: whatever darkness lingered in the depths of Yellowstone was something I couldn't ignore. I'd been pulled into the park ranger's horror stories, a narrative that would haunt me long after the rain ceased to fall. Are you prepared to face the terrifying truths lurking in the wilderness? In this video, we'll expose chilling true stories from park rangers that could change how you explore nature forever. Ignoring these crucial insights could leave you vulnerable to hidden dangers. Stay tuned to uncover a shocking revelation that could save your life on your next outdoor adventure. As a park ranger, I'd always known the backwoods had their secrets. That night, the rain pattered against my windshield like a steady drumbeat, almost soothing in its rhythm. A sound I'd come to associate with the kind of sleep aid that made you forget the world. But as I parked my truck near the old abandoned house, a sense of unease washed over me. I'd heard the rumors local kids dared each other to explore the place, claiming it was haunted, filled with ghost stories and scary tales that left you shivering long after the telling. The shed behind the house caught my eye, a hulking structure that seemed out of place. Its steel-reinforced door hung broken off the hinges, swinging slightly in the wind like a pendulum counting down to something. I stepped closer, each squelch of mud beneath my boots feeling heavier than the last. The windows were boarded up as if someone wanted to keep whatever was inside trapped. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity tugged at my mind, pulling me deeper into the narrative of the night. Peering through a crack in the boards, I saw what was inside. A queen-size bed, its white sheets shredded and partly singed, lay in the center of the shed. The scene felt wrong, like a horrific bedtime story someone had forgotten to finish. Why was there a bed here? Who had used it, and why did it look like it had been abandoned in a hurry? The rain picked up, creating a symphony of unsettling sounds that echoed around me, mingling with my rapid thoughts. I stepped inside, feeling the cold, damp air envelop me like a shroud. The shed felt alive, the shadows flickering and dancing with the dim light filtering through the cracks. I could hear the rain outside, a constant reminder of the world beyond this forsaken space. The scent of mold and decay filled my nostrils as I stepped further in, my heart pounding louder than the rain sounds surrounding me. This wasn't just an old shed. It was a trap waiting to ensnare the curious, the reckless, and the unaware. My flashlight beam flickered across the walls, revealing faded graffiti and remnants of past lives. "Stay away," one message read, while another simply said, "Leave." Those warnings sent chills down my spine. I had come here searching for answers, but now I felt like I was stumbling into a horror story of my own. The tension hung thick in the air, making it hard to breathe. I could sense something lurking just out of sight, a psychological weight pressing on me, but I shook it off. This was just an old shed in the woods, right? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of anxiety threatening to overwhelm me. The rain continued its relentless assault outside, a chilling backdrop to my exploration. I decided to take a closer look at the bed, hoping to find anything that could explain why it was here, in this forgotten shed. As I approached, the floor creaked under my weight, the sound echoing in the stillness, a stark reminder that I wasn't alone. The sheets were in tatters, their white fabric stained with dark, sinister marks. My mind raced with thoughts of the stories I'd heard about the area, how this place was said to be a hideout for those seeking refuge from the law. Or perhaps something far worse. Scary stories about missing persons filled my head, but I couldn't turn back now. Something compelled me to dig deeper, to uncover whatever had happened here. The fear coursing through me was mingled with an undeniable curiosity. Suddenly, a sound pierced the air, a soft whisper that seemed to come from the corner of the shed. I froze, straining to hear. It was as if the shadows themselves were speaking, but the words were muffled, indistinguishable. My heart raced as I scanned the dim corners, trying to pinpoint the source. Was it just the wind, or was something alive in the darkness? I flicked off my flashlight, the sudden plunge into darkness amplifying the fear that gripped me. With my heart pounding in my chest, I leaned closer to the bed, searching for clues. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. "Get out," they seemed to say, twisting into a chilling narrative that wrapped around me like a serpent. Panic began to set in. I turned back toward the door, the broken entrance feeling like both a lifeline and a trap. My gut told me to flee, to escape whatever was lurking in the corners of this shed, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't human, but it was close enough to make me question my sanity. In that moment, the shed transformed from a simple structure into a prison. The rain outside intensified, its rhythmic pounding now sounding like a frantic warning. I realized I wasn't just investigating a creepy location. I was walking straight into a horror story that seemed to weave itself around me, each detail more terrifying than the last. The guttural sound reverberated through the shed, slicing through the tension like a knife. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. The whispers had stopped, leaving an oppressive silence that was somehow more unsettling. I fought the urge to bolt for the door, forcing myself to stay grounded, to face whatever terror had taken root in this place. With every nerve in my body screaming for me to leave, I steeled my resolve. I had to uncover the truth behind this abandoned shed, behind the tales that swirled around it. Glancing back at the bed, I noticed something glinting beneath the tattered sheets. Curiosity overpowered my fear, and I approached it cautiously, each step echoing in the quiet. As I reached out and pulled back the sheets, a chill washed over me. Underneath was a small rusted dagger, its blade stained dark with age or something else. My stomach twisted as I recalled stories of park rangers finding strange objects in the woods, remnants of past horrors woven into the very fabric of the land. This dagger felt like a dark chapter in the narrative of this place, one I wasn't sure I was ready to read. As I turned it over in my hands, a wave of nausea hit me. The whispers returned, softer now but insistent, filling the air with a sense of urgency. Leave before it's too late. I clenched the dagger tighter, feeling its cold metal bite into my palm, an anchor in the storm of fear threatening to swallow me whole. Outside, the rain fell harder, blurring the edges of reality and making it hard to differentiate between what was real and what was imagined. In that moment, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a presence coiling around me like smoke. My instincts screamed that I was no longer alone. It was as if the shed itself had awakened, feeding off my fear. I could almost hear its heartbeat, synchronized with the pulsing rhythm of the rain. "You're trapped," the whispers seemed to taunt. My breath quickened as I scanned the corners once more, half expecting to see a figure lurking just beyond the beam of my flashlight, but all I saw were shadows, flickering in the dim light like the ghosts of those who had come before me. A rush of adrenaline surged through me, pushing me into action. I couldn't let this place consume me like it had so many others. I shoved the dagger into my pocket, and with a determined stride I moved toward the door. Just as I reached the threshold, a loud crash echoed through the shed. My heart dropped. I turned, and the darkness seemed to coalesce into a shape, a swirling mass that threatened to engulf me. The atmosphere thickened, and my mind raced with the realization that I was teetering on the edge of something profoundly sinister. In an instant, the swirling mass coalesced into something that felt almost human, its form shifting in the shadows. I stood frozen, caught between fight and flight, heart racing as I fought to grasp the reality of what I was witnessing. The shed seemed to close in around me, the walls bending under the weight of unspoken fears and forgotten tales. "Get out!" the whispers echoed in my mind, and the air turned thick with dread, as if the very space was alive, demanding my escape. I snapped into action, fueled by sheer survival instinct. I sprinted toward the broken door, my boots slipping slightly on the wet floor. The rain continued its relentless percussion against the roof, almost drowning out the sound of my pounding heart. Just as I reached the threshold, I felt a cold breath on my neck, as if something invisible had reached out to snag me back into the depths of the shed. I could almost hear the echoes of horror stories coming to life, the chilling narratives of those who had come before me, all warning me of what lurked in the dark. With a surge of adrenaline, I burst through the doorway, stumbling into the night air. The rain hit me like a wave, a sharp contrast to the stale atmosphere I'd left behind. I could still hear the whispers, distant yet persistent, like a chorus chanting my name. The sensation of being pursued sent me racing down the muddy path, my mind swirling with the unsettling memories of what I had just experienced. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had unwittingly opened a door to something ancient and dark, something that craved my fear. The abandoned house loomed behind me, a foreboding silhouette against the stormy sky, but I didn't dare look back. I focused on putting distance between myself and that cursed shed. With each step, I recalled the stories, real-life accounts of park rangers who had vanished in the woods, their tales fading into the collective memory like smoke in the wind. Had I become a part of those narratives, scary tales told around campfires, each recounting a chilling experience that echoed through the years? As I reached my truck, the rain finally began to let up, but the dread remained, a heavy weight on my chest. I threw the dagger onto the passenger seat, a grim reminder of the horrors I had faced. The reality of what I had stumbled upon sank in the true park rangers' horror stories were not just tales to frighten children. They were warnings rooted in the land's dark history. My heart still raced as I drove away, the shed fading into the distance, but the whispers clung to my mind, a haunting echo that would follow me long into the night. The rain washed away the physical remnants of my ordeal, but it couldn't cleanse the experience from my memory. I knew I would carry those terrifying moments with me, a chilling testament to the reality of the woods and the truth behind the abandoned shed, a dark chapter that blended the line between the known and the unknown, leaving me forever altered by the shadows that lingered just beyond the light. What would you do if you found yourself stalked by a predator in the wild? In today's video, we'll dive into a terrifying experience that every outdoor enthusiast should hear. If you're serious about your safety in the wilderness and don't want to fall victim to the unexpected, you need to watch until the end. The revelation at the conclusion will have you rethinking your next hike. I never thought I'd encounter something so unsettling during my time as a backcountry park ranger. When I set off to hike an infrequently traveled trail in Washington state, I figured it would be like any other day in the wild. The air was crisp, the scent of pine filled my lungs, and all I had to worry about were the usual forest sounds. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant babble of a stream. Yet, something felt off from the moment I started my ascent. It began with that nagging sensation, the creeping unease that prickled the back of my neck. I couldn't shake it, not even as I passed familiar markers on the trail. The wildlife around me seemed to hush, as if holding its breath. Every snap of a twig or flutter of leaves made me jump. I dismissed it as paranoia, but I couldn't ignore the fresh scratches on the trees or the droppings scattered along the path. These signs were common in these woods, yet they added an unsettling edge to my hike. Still, I pressed on, determined to reach the old shelter before dusk. By the time I arrived, twilight was creeping in, and the shadows seemed to deepen with each passing minute. The shelter had 3 walls and a roof. Standing alone against the backdrop of towering pines, it felt both like a refuge and a trap. As I settled in for the night, I arranged my emergency foil tarp around my sleeping bag, hoping to catch any sounds that might warn me if trouble approached. I told myself I was just being cautious, but as the wind howled outside, that initial feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. I lay there, tense and wide awake, listening to the rain sounds pattering against the roof. The forest was alive with noises, but I couldn't help but feel isolated. The only source of light was my small lantern, casting flickering shadows that danced on the remaining wall. Every sound seemed amplified, every rustle a potential threat. I tried to drown my anxiety with thoughts of the true stories I'd heard around the campfire, horror stories about rangers who faced the wild and its mysteries. This wasn't a ghost tale. It was my reality, and it was creeping me out more than I'd like to admit. As dawn broke, I stepped outside, still on edge but eager to return to the safety of civilization. I hiked the same path I had taken the day before, hoping it would be uneventful, but my heart sank when I found fresh droppings and new claw marks on the trees. Just past the shelter, hidden in dense brush, I stumbled upon the remnants of a deer, mostly eaten. It struck me then, cougars stashed their prey, and here I was, a tiny figure in this vast wilderness, at least 13 miles from help. The sheer isolation gripped me. I made a snap decision to cut my trip short and hurriedly retraced my steps, the hairs on my neck standing tall, each rustle in the underbrush sending my heart racing. I pushed myself to move faster, feeling the weight of the forest close in around me. Each step felt like I was running a gauntlet, every sound an echo of my own anxiety. The last 2 hours of my hike were pure adrenaline. As dusk descended, draping the trees in a veil of shadow, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond my line of sight. It was no longer just paranoia. It was instinct screaming at me to hurry. With the sun dipping below the horizon, the darkness crept in faster than I anticipated. My pace quickened, heart thumping against my ribs like a warning bell. I wanted to call out, to break the suffocating silence of the woods, but something held me back. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. What if it was already watching? The trees loomed overhead, branches clawing at the sky like fingers stretching for a better grip. I could almost hear their whispers, mocking my fear. The rain sounds transformed into a rhythmic thrum as the sky opened up, drenching the forest. I paused for a moment, breathless, trying to shake off the chill that seeped into my bones. That's when I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flash of tawny fur. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The weight of the forest seemed to shift, and I could feel something large shifting just beyond my vision. Was it my imagination? No, I'd seen it. There was a moment of disbelief, then clarity. I was being stalked. It was a primal fear that gripped me, turning my blood to ice. The thought of being hunted, of being the prey, was enough to set my legs into motion again. I couldn't afford to think about what could happen if I stayed in one place too long. The isolation of the woods became suffocating, an invisible barrier keeping me from safety. As I moved deeper into the trees, the darkness thickened around me, wrapping me in a suffocating shroud. I fought to keep calm, drawing on all the techniques I'd learned about staying aware in the wilderness. But fear is a powerful adversary. It twists your perceptions. Every snapping twig, every gust of wind sent my heart racing. But as I quickened my pace, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that my casual reassurances were just a thin veil over the reality of my situation. Then I heard its soft padding footsteps behind me, barely a whisper in the rain. I stopped short, listening, straining to hear over my heartbeat. I was certain I was not alone. The true stories about park rangers confronting nature's fierce side flooded my mind. This wasn't just a scary story anymore. It was happening to me. I had to keep moving, but fear rooted me in place for just a heartbeat longer. Knowing that the darkness was alive, and I was its prey, panic surged through me, a visceral urge to run, to flee from the shadows closing in. I forced myself to breathe, each inhalation sharp and shallow, as I calculated my next move. I had to find a way out of this dark maze of trees and underbrush. My heart raced as I broke into a sprint, feet pounding against the wet earth. The rain poured down in sheets, masking any noise except for the rush of water and the distant rustling of leaves. It felt like I was in a nightmare, where every step could lead to something worse lurking just out of sight. The adrenaline coursed through me like fire, propelling me forward. Even as the branches snagged at my clothes and skin, I ducked beneath low-hanging limbs, dodging underbrush that threatened to entangle me. My mind raced through scenarios, but all I could focus on was the sensation of being hunted. It was a primal instinct that ignited my every movement, pushing me to escape the unseen predator. With every rustle in the trees, I felt the presence behind me, urging me to run faster. Every few minutes I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the silhouette of a cougar, its eyes glowing in the darkness. My instinct screamed at me to keep moving, yet every glance backward was a gamble. Was it there? Or was I losing my grip on reality? I tried to rationalize it, reminding myself that cougars usually avoid humans, but that only fed my anxiety. I could be in its territory, and I didn't belong there. Suddenly I stumbled upon a small stream, its cold water gushing down the rocky path. I paused briefly, unsure if I should cross it or follow it downstream. The decision was taken from me as I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, louder this time. The growl was faint but unmistakable, a low rumbling threat that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't stand still any longer. I leaped over the stream, landing awkwardly on the other side, the cold water soaking my boots, but I didn't care. I had to get away. With renewed determination, I navigated through the thick underbrush, pushing aside ferns and branches. My only goal was to reach the campsite, where other rangers would be, where safety lay. As I climbed a slight incline, I felt the forest shift around me, almost as if it were alive. I could feel the air change, heavier and more oppressive. I kept running, not daring to look back, even as my instincts screamed at me to be vigilant. I focused on the sounds of the forest, the rain, the rustling leaves, the soft thump of my own heart trying to drown out the fear gnawing at my mind. It felt like hours had passed, but it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes when I finally spotted a faint glow through the trees. My breath hitched as I realized it was the lights of my fellow rangers' campsite. Relief flooded through me. Mingling with the adrenaline, I sprinted toward the light, desperation fueling my legs. But just as I reached the clearing, a deafening crash echoed through the forest, making me stumble to a halt. Whatever had been following me was close now, and I could feel the weight of its presence behind me, the unshakable tension hanging thick in the air. I stood frozen, heart racing as the sounds of the forest faded into a heavy silence, as if the world itself had paused. The campsite was so close, yet I felt trapped, an animal cornered by fear and uncertainty. The glow of the campfire flickered like a beacon, but the presence behind me loomed larger, its weight pressing down on my chest. I could hear the rapid thud of my heart, drowning out the rain sounds as I struggled to regain my breath. The shadows danced around me, and I could have sworn I saw something darting between the trees. Then I heard it again, an unmistakable low growl, reverberating through the stillness. It was close, too close, and panic surged anew. I took a tentative step back toward the light, but my instincts held me in place. What if I made the wrong move? My thoughts raced, feeding into the tension. I had to think clearly, but fear made everything feel distorted, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to look back. The silhouette of a large creature stood just beyond the tree line, its muscles rippling beneath its fur. The glow from the campfire illuminated just enough to see its piercing eyes, fixated on me. This was no figment of my imagination. This was the reality I had feared. The cougar was real, a living embodiment of every horror story I'd ever heard as a park ranger. I had trespassed into its territory, and now it was letting me know I didn't belong. In that moment of clarity, I remembered the emergency whistle clipped to my pack. With trembling hands, I fumbled for it, my heart pounding louder than the rain pelting down around me. The sound echoed through the woods, sharp and piercing. The growl from the cougar intensified, but before it could make its move, the rustling from the campsite grew louder. Shouts erupted from the rangers as they came rushing toward the sound, flashlights bobbing through the darkness. The creature turned, startled by the sudden commotion, and in a flash it melted back into the shadows, the fearsome presence disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. I stumbled into the clearing, breathless and soaked, as my fellow rangers surrounded me, their faces painted with concern. I tried to explain, but words failed me. All I could think about was the pulse of adrenaline still coursing through my veins, the raw terror that had held me captive. As the rangers gathered around, they listened intently to my harrowing tale of being stalked, their expressions shifting from concern to disbelief. They'd heard the horror stories of cougars before, but witnessing one so close was a reality none of us wanted to face. I realized in that moment how thin the line was between the wild and ourselves, how easily we could be turned into mere narratives scary enough to be retold around campfires. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt different, a soothing backdrop to our gathering. I shared my experience with them, the fear that had gripped me, how Adi felt utterly alone in a world that was both beautiful and terrifying. As we sat around the fire, the tension eased, replaced by a shared understanding of the wilderness' unpredictable nature. We laughed, recalling our own stories, realizing that while fear can paralyze, it also binds us in ways we might never fully understand. That night became more than just a tale of survival. It transformed into a lesson in respect for the wilderness, an acknowledgement of the wild's rules and our place within it. And as I lay down to sleep, the echoes of my fear began to fade, replaced by the camaraderie of my fellow rangers, and the gentle sound of rain lulling me into a deep, restorative slumber. I had faced a fear that night, one that would linger in my memory, but I emerged stronger, a living testament to the power of shared experiences in the heart of nature. Ever felt like you're not at the top of the food chain? This video unveils a spine-chilling true story where a park ranger stumbles upon a brutal fight for survival in the wilderness. You'll discover the shocking reality of predator versus prey, and what it reveals about the wild. Don't miss out on the final revelation that will leave you questioning your place in Nature Watch until the end to see why this is a tale you won't forget. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just me in the wilderness, far from civilization, the kind of peace you think you can only find in movies. surrounded by the scent of pine and the distant murmur of the river. But as darkness enveloped the forest, that calm shattered. A shriek cut through the night, an unearthly sound that seemed to echo from some primal nightmare. It sent a chill down my spine, and I felt that deep, gnawing instinct. Something was wrong. We dashed into the thick of the woods, hearts pounding as we navigated the underbrush. Each step felt heavy, the cold air thick with tension, and the shrieks grew louder, more desperate. I was just a park ranger, trained to deal with nature, not the horrors it could hide. My mind raced, and I couldn't help but think of all those horror stories you hear around campfires. Tales that blend truth with the supernatural, but tonight felt far too real. The atmosphere was electric, and I felt a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through me. Finally, we reached the lowlands by the river. The moonlight shimmered on the water, revealing a shocking sight. A bull moose, its massive frame heaving with exhaustion and pain. Blood stained its sides, a gaping wound that told a gruesome story of survival against impossible odds. It was being hunted. I stood frozen, watching as a pack of 6 wolves surged through the brush, fierce and determined, their eyes glinting with an animalistic hunger. The scene unfolded like something out of a nature documentary. Only this was no film. It was real life, raw and brutal. The moose stumbled, clearly struggling to cross the river, and in that moment, I felt a pang of empathy. It was just trying to survive, just like all of us. But nature doesn't care for sentiment. The wolves were relentless, their instincts driving them to chase down their prey. My heart raced as I watched the chase, feeling an odd mixture of fascination and horror as the moose faltered and fell. It was a true story of life and death right in front of my eyes, the ultimate display of nature's cruelty. Then came the bear. A full-grown grizzly lumbered into view, as if the scene needed more chaos. It charged at the wolves, scattering them with ease. I stood there frozen in shock. 2 of the wolves were crushed against the ground with brutal force, their bodies crumpling. The remaining pack retreated but didn't go far, lurking in the shadows, watching as the bear claimed its prize. I realized then, in that heart-stopping moment, that we humans were not at the top of the food chain. We were mere spectators in this brutal theater of survival. One ID only ever heard about in chilling narratives, scary enough to make your skin crawl. I felt a tight knot in my stomach as I watched the grizzly feast. It was a gruesome sight, but I couldn't look away. The wolf pack lingered, watching their opportunity unfold from the shadows, their eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and hunger. It was a reminder of how easily the balance of power shifts in the wild. Nature had its own rules, and in that moment, I was reminded of the park ranger's tales, the scary stories that painted the wilderness as both beautiful and brutal. As the bear dug into its meal, I glanced around, ensuring we were alone. It was hard to believe that in the middle of nowhere, with no other humans for at least 40 kilometers, we were witnessing something so primal. The rain started to fall lightly, creating a rhythm against the leaves that felt almost calming, like a sleep aid after the chaos. But there was no comfort here, only the reality of survival playing out before us. The moose let out a final haunting cry, a sound that reverberated through the stillness of the night, sending shivers down my spine. I could feel the weight of its struggle, the desperation of a creature clinging to life. The wolves hesitated, sensing the change in the air, their instincts wrestling with their hunger. The grizzly's massive form blocked them from their prize, and I could see them shift, assessing their options. Would they dare to confront the bear for a chance at the remnants of the moose? I exchanged glances with my companion, a shared understanding passing between us. We were both gripped by the sheer intensity of the moment. "Do you think they'll try?" I whispered, not wanting to break the spell of the night. The response was a simple shrug, but I could see the tension in their jaw. It was one thing to read about park rangers' horror stories, but witnessing this felt like being thrust into the heart of one. The anxiety that coursed through me was palpable, the unknown creeping into my thoughts like a dark shadow. As the rain intensified, washing over the scene, the wolves finally made their move. They split into 2 groups, circling around the bear with a cunning strategy born from necessity. It was almost like a dance, one ID never expected to witness. My heart raced as the wolves darted in and out of the shadows, their sleek forms disappearing and reappearing like phantoms of the night. The scene blurred the line between predator and prey, and I found myself entranced by the brutal elegance of nature's law. This was no longer just a hunt. It had become a fight for survival, a true testament to the wild's relentless will. Yet, despite the brutality unfolding before us, I felt a deep respect for the creatures engaged in this struggle. I had always known that the wilderness held its secrets, but watching this clash of instincts was a revelation. It was a powerful reminder that every creature, big or small, plays a role in this intricate web of life. As I observed the scene, I understood that this was a story not just about life and death, but about the raw, untamed essence of nature itself. The chilling narratives, scary enough to grip your heart, were happening right before my eyes. The chaos intensified as the wolves danced around the grizzly, their movements fluid and calculated. I couldn't help but admire their strategy, a blend of instinct and teamwork that seemed almost intelligent. But with every passing moment, the situation became more chaotic. The bear, with its massive bulk and brute strength, swiped at the wolves with ferocity. The sharp sounds of growls and snapping jaws pierced the air, each growl echoing in the stillness around us like an ominous soundtrack to a horror story. The rain poured down, soaking everything, blending the earthy scent of wet leaves with the metallic tang of blood in the air. The scene was visceral, a reminder that nature can be as horrifying as any scary story told around the campfire. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a primal rhythm sensing with the unfolding drama. It was a horrifying sight, but also awe-inspiring in its rawness, an unfiltered look at life and death in the wilderness. I watched as one of the wolves, bolder than the rest, lunged at the bear's flank, nipping at its legs. It was a foolish move, and I could almost feel the collective breath of the pack as they held back. Weighing their options, the bear turned, its eyes filled with rage, and the wolf barely managed to retreat. I was struck by how quickly the dynamic shifted. The wolf's bravery was met with the unyielding power of the bear, reminding me of the balance of fear and courage that defines the wild. In the chaos, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. The distant sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets had been swallowed by the brutal reality before us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something sacred. There was a primal horror in witnessing this battle, a reminder that we are not merely observers in nature, but participants in its ever-turning cycle of life. Then, it happened. The bear, sensing the vulnerability of the pack, charged forward with an intensity that took my breath away. It was a sudden movement, an explosion of strength that jolted me out of my thoughts. The wolves scattered, and I instinctively took a step back, feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins. I wanted to run, to escape the visceral reality unfolding before me, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. This was a scene I'd read about in park rangers' horror stories, but nothing could have prepared me for its authenticity. The chaos raged on, and in that moment, I realized I was witnessing a battle for dominance, not just a hunt. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the rain now a mere whisper against the backdrop of nature's fury. I knew this was a rare glimpse into a world that existed beyond our understanding, a world where survival dictated every move. As the conflict continued, I couldn't help but reflect on the true nature of fear, life, and the intricate web of existence that binds us all. The bear's charge was met with chaos, the air thick with tension as the wolves scattered. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, torn between instinctual fear and a morbid fascination with the spectacle before me. It was surreal, like watching a scene from a horror movie unfold in real time, each moment more gripping than the last. The bear, sensing its dominance, let out a triumphant roar that echoed through the trees, a declaration of victory. But even in its glory, I could see the weariness etched into its fur. This fight had drained them all. After the initial flurry, the remaining wolves huddled at the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on the bear as it feasted. It was a haunting image. The pack, usually fierce and united, now fractured and wary. The rain had turned to a steady drizzle, a reminder that nature was indifferent to the violence unfolding. I found myself in awe of the stark reality of survival. This wasn't just about the moose or the bear, but about every living thing that existed within these woods. As I stood there, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of melancholy. The moose was gone, and in its place, a brutal reminder of nature's unyielding laws remained. It wasn't just a story. It was a life that had ended, a cycle that continued. I glanced at my companion, their face reflecting the same mix of emotions swirling inside me. Words felt inadequate. How could we articulate the depth of what we'd witnessed? What do we do now? They finally asked, breaking the silence. I didn't have an answer. We were just spectators to this macabre theater, left to ponder the lessons etched in blood and instinct. As the bear continued its meal, I noticed the wolves slowly inching closer, driven by desperation, a need to survive. They knew the bear was distracted, and the sight of them edging forward sent a wave of unease through me. I felt a sharp pang of empathy for both the wolves and the bear. They were locked in a struggle that defined their existence. It was a true story of life, death, and the harsh realities of the wild. Suddenly, a sharp yelp broke the air. A young wolf had ventured too close, and the bear, aware of its surroundings, swiped its massive paw. In an instant, the young wolf was thrown back, and the pack retreated in a flurry of fur and fear. My heart sank. Nature was relentless, and as I watched the scene unfold, I couldn't help but feel that we were all just players in a cruel game, subject to forces beyond our control. As the rain poured down, washing away the remnants of the struggle, I knew this night would haunt me for a long time. I had come to the forest seeking solace, yet I left with a deeper understanding of its brutality. The park ranger's horror stories I had heard were no longer just tales, they were warnings, lessons on the delicate balance of life and death. We made our way back through the now familiar path, the night closing in around us. I realized that the real horror was not just in witnessing death, but in understanding that we were part of a greater cycle, one that demanded respect and reverence for the wild, where every creature played its role, no matter how terrifying it may be. The stars twinkled faintly through the thinning clouds as we left the scene behind, knowing we had been changed by what we'd witnessed. This was a night I would never forget, a true story that spoke to the heart of our existence within this untamed wilderness, a chilling reminder of what it truly means to be a part of nature. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.